According to Pro Football Reference, there have been 524 head coaches in NFL history as of the end of the 2023-24 season. The vast majority of those coaches also played football either collegiately or in the pros. But which position is the best indicator of head coaching success? Are offensive linemen more likely to be great coaches than defensive backs? I've gone through all the stats to try to answer that question. First, let's talk about some caveats of this analysis. The most important thing to talk about is how I've grouped players from the early days of the game. Remember, when football was getting started, and for several decades after, most players played both ways. How do you properly place someone who played in the 1920s at both quarterback and defensive back? Well, the short answer is that you don't. It's impossible to get it exact because nearly everyone played offense and defense. However, I've tried to look through logs and stats to see which position they were most known for and sorted them that way. This means that offensive linemen have more head coaches among their ranks, and likely means this list is biased toward the offensive side of the ball. If there's interest, I might go through and do a ranking of coaches who played past the 1960s to get a more accurate list in regards to which position the coach played, but I don't think it affects the rankings too much. It's also worth noting that I've grouped wide receivers with tight ends and all defensive backs together. If you broke those two groups out even further, tight ends might go up the rankings because there aren't many of them, but they've been relatively solid as head coaches. However, I again don't think this would change things too much, so with all of that preamble out of the way, let's jump into the rankings. Number 9, never played. By my count, there have been 32 head coaches who never played at the collegiate or professional level, with most of those coming in the early days of the sport. This group also ties for the least amount of titles won in NFL history and has an abysmal 26% winning percentage in the playoffs, making them an easy candidate for the bottom of this list despite counting Al Davis and Adam Gase among its ranks. To their credit, coaches who didn't play football at a high level do have a positive regular season winning percentage, but that's not enough to get them over the hump. Number 8, kicker/punter. To be fair, there have only been 2 primary kickers/punters who have gone on to coach in the NFL, and Dallas Cowboys legend Tom Landry accounts for 418 of the 458 games coached. While Landry did spend time at safety during his playing career, he led the league in punting twice, so I'm slotting him in here. Despite the success of its marquee player, I simply can't rank this position group any higher due to the lack of volume. Number 7, running back. Here's where it starts to get tough. 74 different head coaches played running back before jumping to the sideline, with 50 of those players spending at least a chunk of time at the pro level. However, this group posted negative winning percentages in both the regular season and the playoffs. I will concede that this group has the second most titles among positions, and many of those came before the NFL implemented a playoff system, which means those coaches missed out on a chance to rack up playoff wins. While they have 2 coaches in the top 10 all-time wins with Dan Reeves and Curly Lambeau, they have a ton of guys who coached 1 or 2 losing seasons and then left the pro ranks, making this position tough to slot. Number 6, wide receiver/tight end. As mentioned, several of the best players in this group play tight end. That includes modern coaches like Dan Campbell and old heads like Mike Ditka. This group barely has a positive regular season winning percentage at 50.72%, but isn't as successful in the playoffs at 46.73%. They've also only won 14 titles, but with only 69 total players over the years, that's not too terrible. Hopefully with guys like Campbell and Mike Tomlin at the helm, this group can continue to rise up the rankings. Number 5, defensive back. DB is a weird position to judge because most of the best coaches from this group had the bulk of their success as college head coaches. I mean, if we could count all of the NCAA titles Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, and Pete Carroll won, this might be the number 1 group, and that's with Carroll losing one of his titles and several of his wins at USC. Plus, some might argue I should move Tom Landry into this group. That said, DB has a nearly even winning percentage in the regular season and playoffs and only 6 titles. With that, you might be wondering why this group is higher than receivers and ends. Well, despite only having 58 coaches, this position has coached more games than all but 3 positions. That means coaches with a background as a DB have shown an ability to stick around for several years. On top of that, the winningest coach in NFL history, Don Shula, played DB in the 50s, giving them enough of a bump to take the 5th place slot. Number 4, linebacker. Linebackers have a 45% playoff winning percentage and only 46 total coaches, which hurts their rankings. However, those 46 coaches have won 17 titles, putting them in 3rd place all-time in pro championships. The position also has 2 top 10 coaches by wins in Chuck Noll and Marty Schottenheimer. Like DB, this position does suffer from some of its best coaches making their name in the college ranks, with Lou Holtz being the biggest of those names. Number 3, quarterback. Of all the positions, quarterback has the most games coached at 7,049. Between all of those games, the position only has a 47.66 regular season winning percentage. It rises to 50% in the playoffs, which is why the position can also claim the second most titles at 22. Interestingly, it's also the only offensive position that has more coaches who played collegiately compared to at the pro level. While the position only has one coach in the all-time top 10 wins list with Paul Brown, there are a host of famous coaches who played the position before jumping onto the sidelines, including Bobby Petrino, Lane Kiffin, John Gruden, Sean Payton, and Mike Shanahan. Number 2, defensive line. Okay, I will admit that I might have ranked defensive line a little highly. There have been only 29 coaches to come from this position, which is the lowest of the major position groups. However, the position has posted a 50.76 regular season winning percentage, and that only gets better in the playoffs at 57.33%. Despite the low number of total coaches, the position has 13 titles. That's below other positions, but remember how few coaches the defensive line can claim. This position also has the number 2 coach in all-time wins in George Halas, giving it a big bump in the rankings. Number 1, offensive line. I think we could sum this up in 4 words: Bill Belichick, Andy Reid. Those coaches are 3 and 4 in all-time wins and have 9 total titles between them. Beyond those 2 coaches, 105 other men played offensive line at the collegiate level or above. That's more than any other position. Despite the huge number of coaches, the position has a 50.18% regular season winning percentage, which goes up to a ridiculous 58.29% in the playoffs. They also have 23 championships, which is the most among all coaches. Again, there's an argument that the position is overloaded with players from the early days of football, but with modern star coaches like Belichick, Reid, and John Madden, it's clear that the offensive line is the best position group for building NFL coaches. All that said, the real conclusion has to be that no position group outperforms another by a margin that really matters. The only thing I'd suggest is never bringing in a coach who stopped playing in high school, because they tend to choke it away much more than anyone else in the playoffs. So what do you think? Disagree with my rankings? Can we use any of this to predict who's going to be the next great coach? Go ahead and sound off in the comments.